right now?
Well, it's hard to say at this point. I don't want to jump to any conclusions as far as where Trump stands. From what I've seen so far, he's completely surrounded by J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and neocons. And my feeling is that he's being influenced or that he's aware. He's either being basically my position is that either he's in the best case scenario he's surrounded by enemies. In the worst case scenario he's surrounded by friends. So the jury's still out on that for me. I think at the very least he's being influenced or manipulated by these elites that he's surrounded by.
Do you think these elites, do you think they're trying to remove him? You think that's their end game here?
I've seen, a lot of people are looking at that possibility. I personally see Trump, and this is the reason why I originally predicted that he would win the election. I see Trump as more useful to the globalists in office than out of office. And the reason I believe that is because right now I believe we're on the verge of a new economic shift. We've been sort of in a slow process of collapse since the 2008 debt bubble burst. And in that process, we've hit several different phases, and I think we're about to enter a new phase in which equities are going to start to reverse. I predicted at the beginning of the year that equities would reverse within about 6 months into Trump's presidency. And right now you can see, we'll see how things progress, but right now we're looking at bank stocks are in reversal and oil's beginning to go into reversal. So I think, 6 months or maybe give or take a couple months, we will be in the markets will be in reversal. Also, you have a lot of instability in bond markets. There's a lot of things going on around the world geopolitically that could be flashpoints for a new phase in the collapse. And the elites need a scapegoat for these events. They need a scapegoat that they can distract the public with so that they don't take the blame when the dust settles. And I believe that Trump is the perfect scapegoat. I believe also by extension that they would like to blame conservatives in general, and just that the conservative philosophy, that mindset of sovereignty and nationalism, so-called populism. I think the goal is to set us up as a scapegoat and blame us for a collapse scenario, which they've been engineering for years.
Okay, when you say the equity market's going to come down, by how much do you think it's going to come down? Do you think there's going to be a correction like 10%, 20%? I mean, how far down do you think it's going to go?
I think by summertime, an initial correction of at least 10%, and then we're not going to see a bounce back. You might see some small sort of dead cat bounces going towards fall, but I think what will happen is it'll be initial sort of 10% shock, and then it's going to incrementally drop from there, and it's just going to keep dropping into next year. And it's that the old frog in the boiling pot scenario where people will, maybe that initial shock will sort of wake people up, but then the crash will move into sort of a slower phase, and people will get used to the idea of that. Well, stocks they go down every week. That's just kind of the way it is, and I don't think a lot of people will react or respond until further into 2018.
Do you think Trump will do anything when the stock market starts to fall?
I think he'll initially he'll blame the Fed. I think he'll blame the Federal Reserve, and I've seen a sort of a progressing narrative as far as Trump versus the Fed. I've seen the Fed and particularly the the Democratic left or the extreme left sort of generating support for the Federal Reserve as being anti-Trump or a force to counter Trump. And Trump has been, I guess, building a narrative of being, iron-fisted as far as dealing with the Fed. We haven't seen much of that yet, but his rhetoric is going in that direction. I think, again, this scenario of Trump versus the Federal Reserve is perfect for the elites because ultimately, as I've written many times in the past, ultimately the goal of the elites is to reduce the United States and its economy down to about third world status. And in order to do that, they're going to have to remove the dollar's world reserve status. Without the world reserve status, the U.S. economy is dead in the water. It's the only thing keeping us afloat. So in order to kill the dollar's world reserve status, they can't just do it outright. Again, they need a scapegoat. So if you have, in the United States, you have the President of the United States in this epic struggle with the central bank, and the dollar loses world reserve status because countries around the world lose faith in the dollar, then you can simply blame Trump. You can blame nationalism, or he's a maniac. He's a populist maniac. The dollar lost world reserve status. It's all his fault. It's all the fault of conservatives. They've wanted to kill the Fed for a long time. You kill the dollar's world reserve status, then the elites can start shifting everything into a global basket system, which is what they've wanted to do for a very long time.
Okay, so let me just back up here for one sec. One, do you think the Fed, by raising the interest rates, do you think this was a signal that they're about to bring down the economy? Was this the first step?
Yes, and if you look at some of my articles from last year, I wrote several about the pillars. There were three pillars holding up the U.S. economy. The first pillar was quantitative easing. The second pillar was ultra low interest rates and overnight loans to banks and corporations. And the third pillar is the dollar's world reserve status. We've lost QE, and we're losing the low interest rates right now, and then the final stage would be the loss of world reserve status. And at that point, the U.S. economy will collapse. And I've been predicting that the Fed would raise rates way back when everyone said that there was no way they would raise rates, that they would go into negative rates, or they would go into QE4, which they may do, but that would be after, I think that would be after an equities crash or after a major crisis, that they may move into, quantitative easing or something like that, a QE4. But at this point, they're definitely going to raise rates because, if my theory is correct, they're pulling those pillars out from underneath the U.S. economy in order to create a crisis.
So how many more times do you think they will raise the rates? Because each time they do it, it affects the economy. So how many more times do you think they will go until everything starts to fall apart?
Well, that's hard to say as far as, if we're only talking about this year, I would say they're definitely going to raise again in June. I believe they probably raise at least two more times this year, if not three. I also believe at some point that they will hike rates, and that it will be much higher than people predict or expect. So instead of 0.25 basis points, it'll be 0.5 basis points. I think at some point they are going to hit the markets with a surprise rate hike, something that's bigger than what people expected.
Okay, and how does the debt ceiling play into this right now? I mean, we passed the date where the debt ceiling is supposed to come into effect. It's now frozen at $20 trillion. And according to David Stockman, the U.S. government's going to be running out of money. So how does this play into it? Are they going to raise the debt ceiling? Are they going to not raise the debt ceiling? Where do you think they're going to go with this?
This is it's an odd situation with the debt ceiling debate, because we've seen so many instances where we thought that maybe they would try to initiate a crisis through government shutdown, and in every case, the Republicans, they put up a good facade, but then they rolled over as soon as the vote came around, and they extended the debt ceiling. Now, this situation is maybe a little different because we do have Trump in office. We do have a very sort of militant Democratic Party at this point. And we have some Republicans who are, at least in rhetoric or in appearance, they're very anti-Trump. So it's hard to say. I know that Chuck Schumer recently released a statement saying that if Trump continues to pursue the defunding of Planned Parenthood, the building of the southern border wall, the reversal of Obamacare, if he continues to do that, then the Democrats and some others will push for a government shutdown. That's, it is a possibility. I see it as a major flashpoint. But again, we've seen this so many times where there's a huge fight over the debt ceiling that turned out to be theater. So we'll see. I'm watching it very closely. I recommend everyone else watch it very closely.
Now, I just want to circle back to where you said that the pillars of the United States and what the Fed controls, or the elite control. And you said that we're going to be losing the reserve status. And you're saying that we'll be moving to a different currency. When the United States loses the reserve status, first, is there going to be another country that's going to be reserve status? Is it going to be some other maybe global reserve status? And two, what new currency are we going to have here in the United States?
Okay, well, this is confusing to a lot of people. The idea of the world reserve status being lost and the elites shifting into what they would call a basket currency system. So basically what that means, and this is not, I'm not just pulling this out of thin air. If you go back, the elites have been talking about this for over 30 years in different publications, including, publications like The Economist. They've discussed openly the strategy of removing any one national currency as the world reserve and combining multiple currencies into a basket system under the IMF. And the IMF has a basket system, and they have for about 30 years, and it's called the special drawing rights, or the SDR. So basically what the goal is, or what their strategy is to reduce the dollar's influence in global markets, remove its world reserve status, and then replace the dollar system with the SDR system. And the SDR would just be a basket of multiple currencies. Now, ultimately, the SDR, what it really is a stepping stone to a single global currency system. But the elites are smart. They're not going to try to force a single global currency down our throats right off the bat. What they'll do is they'll have the IMF take over basically monetary management. The IMF will take over all the pegging and values of different currencies. Every major currency already has a designated value in SDRs. For example, the US dollar is worth 0.64 SDRs. So if you had a shift right now, today, into an SDR system, the dollar would be worth 0.64% of what it's worth now on the global market. So we'll still have our dollars, our green dollar bills with the presidents on them. We'll still have that for a time. Over several years, I believe they'll ultimately do what they call harmonizing the value of every currency, mostly downwards. So most currencies will lose quite a bit of value. A lot of economies will shift down into, close to third world status. And then the elites will come out at that point and say, well, all of these currencies are pegged at the same value now anyway, so we might as well just move into a single global currency system. And at that point, then they'll introduce that single currency.
Okay, so we're going to keep what we have right now, but the value of the dollar is going to decrease, which means it's going to cost a lot more to purchase items. So we're going to see inflation, that's what you're saying?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so when we see inflation and the dollar loses value, this is what you're talking about, a third world status? That's how we're going to move into a third world status?
That would be one of the primary triggers for that, yes.
What are the other triggers?
Well, another trigger may be, right now we have building tensions with countries like Saudi Arabia, and the potential loss of petro status in the dollar. That would be another situation in which the dollar would lose quite a bit of value. If Saudi Arabia shifted away from the dollar into a basket of currencies, then most OPEC nations would follow their lead, and the dollar would lose petro status. You also have, considerable debt issues within the United States. There's a multitude of that's the problem. Is it's not any one issue or any one danger that's going to potentially bring the United States down to third world status. There's a swarm of issues, a swarm of them, and being able to identify and prepare or dodge all of those is going to be extremely difficult. There's just so many to track, and that's kind of where we are right now. We're in a sort of a world of inflated bubbles and trigger points, and I think most of that is by design, and when it does happen, I think a lot of people their heads will be spinning because they won't be able to figure out where the source is. What is the cause? What is the root of all this?
What about gold and silver? I mean, as we go through this economic shift and we see inflation, is it still a good idea to own gold and silver, or maybe even Bitcoin?
I'm not a huge fan of Bitcoin just because it's basically it's internet reliant. It's an internet reliant currency system, and there are no guarantees that the internet as we know it now will continue to function the way it does. I mean, we may still have internet, but you can always have restricted access. There's all kinds of ways that governments can reduce access or reduce, they can cut off access to various sites. The internet itself could be shut down. It's happened in countries before. Governments have shut down the internet depending on whatever national emergency is going on. So I don't really promote Bitcoin. I just don't see it as, I'd rather have it, my money in my hands than have it on, reliant on the internet. But as far as gold and silver go, I still see them as definitely an excellent way to protect savings. I recommend most people they continue to prep and prepare for any kind of crisis event. But put about 10% of your savings into gold or silver, because there's always a window of time in any collapse. Regardless of, where you look in modern history, any collapse has a window of time in which either, the currency is crashing or gold and silver are skyrocketing, or both. And, depending on how bad things get, some people will argue, well, you can't eat gold and silver. Well, you can't eat it, but you can buy a lot of food with it in that window of time when things start to crash. And if it does get as bad as if the situation does get as bad as the dollar losing 50% value or more, then gold and silver will be a very lucrative, very viable option, something that you can pay off certain, you could pay off debts, you can buy food, you can continue to function into that crisis stage. And collapses don't happen overnight. They take a lot of time to progress. And there's always a window of time where precious metals are worthwhile.
I mean, you said they take a lot of time, these collapses or the economic shift. How long do you think this one is going to go for? I mean, do you have the stages of what you think is going to happen?
Well, it's everything that's. I mean, I've been writing for the movement for almost 10 years, and I, every stage, it's very strange point in time for me, because every stage that I've been predicting, almost every stage has now happened. Basically, the only thing left that I can predict with any certainty is a stock bubble reversal, a stock market collapse, and I believe that reversal will begin 6 months, basically 6 months after Trump's election, or around June or July. I believe that will be in the middle of that reversal. As far as what happens next, I'm really, for the first time in a while, I'm sort of in the dark, along with a lot of other people. I don't really know how many of these triggers will be initiated this year, how quickly the damage will play out. It's hard for me to say. All I can say is at this point I'm about 90% certain that there will be an equities reversal by June or July.
Do you also think that the globalists, because we can see what's happening with North Korea, with Iran, out in the Middle East, with Syria, do you think the globalists, they're still pushing for war? Do they want war? Is that another part of their goal? I
think they're definitely interested in maintaining at the very least, regional wars. Constant regional warfare. I don't believe that their goal is a World War III scenario, or a nuclear apocalypse or anything like that. I think that they've invested way too much into the control grid infrastructure in all around the world, to sacrifice it in some kind of nuclear melee. That doesn't make sense to me. But I do think that constant regional wars. I think that North Korea is definitely a viable option for them. Some kind of regional warfare in North Korea, higher tensions with China in the South China Sea, that sort of thing. I think they're always going to keep some kind of regional warfare going, and that just keeps everyone. That keeps the populace tense. It keeps them afraid. It makes them more malleable, psychologically malleable, basically. So
do you think that they're planning to go into North Korea? Do you think that's one of their goals?
Well, the rhetoric definitely seems to be heading in that direction. They're talking about, leaving preemptive strikes on the table for North Korea. And I realize we've heard some of that rhetoric before, but I don't know. It feels different this time. I do think North Korea is on the table. Maybe this year or the beginning of next year. I think it is a possibility.
But how are they going to control this? Because if Russia and China sees them, making a move, I mean, is this going to spark off maybe a world war? I mean, how are they going to contain all of this then?
Well, it depends. It depends on what they want. I could be wrong about them pursuing a world war, but I think that first of all, China. If your readers want to, or your listeners want to take a look at some of my articles on the false East-West paradigm, I outline a lot of evidence that shows that the Chinese government and even Russian Putin have pretty strong ties to global banks, and Putin has he has his elitist advisors too. Henry Kissinger is a close friend and advisor to Putin, just like he's an advisor to Trump. So there's a lot of influence on the eastern side of things, just as there is on the western side of things. So when people talk about, well, how are the elites going to handle Russia and China? Well, if I'm correct and the evidence supports my view, then the East will do whatever the elites tell them to do. So if the elites tell them, don't worry about North Korea, we've got this handled, then that's what they'll do.
I wanted to move on to Obama and Soros and what Robert David Steele has said. He's an ex-CIA officer, where they're saying that Obama, was supposed to move out of D.C., and he stayed in D.C. because I guess he was going to move out because he thought Hillary was going to win and he was going to go back to Hawaii, but Trump won and he decided to stay in Washington, D.C. And we see Robert David Steele out there saying that Obama, Soros, they're planning for something in May, protests, riots. From your research, do you see any of that to try to force Trump out?
I do absolutely see a strategy of sort of an Alinsky-esque strategy of civil unrest on the part of the extreme left. And I don't consider George Soros extreme left. He's a globalist. He's an elitist. He just happens to be the guy that's one of the gatekeepers for the left side of the paradigm. So he has his own interests, which may not necessarily be to oust Trump. His interests may be to create enough chaos and crisis within the United States to push Trump into instituting something like martial law. And this is kind of the issue with the left and the social justice cultists and the extreme left is I don't think they understand that they're useful idiots, basically, that they're being used by the elites to initiate a crisis that would be a rationale for a greater government crackdown. Because if you really look at them and how they operate and the strength of their numbers and everything else, they're not really a force to be reckoned with. They're a bunch of kids, basically. They're a bunch of kids. They're kind of oblivious to the greater picture. And there's no way they're going to run Trump out, or they're not going to intimidate conservatives. What I think they might do is piss off conservatives and be the straw that broke the camel's back, or the spark that sets off the powder keg. And I think the goal is to push conservatives into a mindset of basically totalitarianism, push us into rationalizing a major crackdown on these people. And if we do that, and that's really the greatest danger that I see, if conservatives lose sight of their principles and they lose sight of the Constitution in the name of defeating the left, then ultimately, in the long run, we've lost. If we abandon our principles, then we've lost in the long run. And so that's the greatest danger in my mind, is that the elites are using the left to push us towards a totalitarian mindset.
Now, I want to, this is the last question for you, Brandon. I wanted to just get some type of overview of what people should do to prepare for this economic shift. A lot of people write into me and ask me, all different ways of how I should prep and things like that. What are the main things that people should be concerned about for this upcoming economic shift? What should they have in their stores to make sure that they're prepared for this?
Well, you have the typical, there's a plethora of things that people need to have. I would say food is obviously at the top, because it's hard to replicate food production at a level that's sustaining for people, especially people who aren't used to doing that. They're not used to farming. A lot of people don't even even know how to grow a garden. So, and a lot of people don't know how to hunt. A lot of people don't provide food for themselves. So, definitely, I would say 2 years of food minimum, because it's going to take you at least 2 years of practicing food production before you get to the point where you're able to sustain yourself. But as far as all the, there's all the gear and all the preps and all the things you can buy and stockpile and all of that. Almost everyone kind of overlooks one major preparedness factor. I see it everywhere. It's a huge detriment for a lot of people in the liberty movement, and that's that they don't pursue or build community. They want to be secret squirrel ninja preppers. They want to, they want to be the guy with all the stuff in their basement. Nobody knows about it, and none of their neighbors know, because, hey, when the collapse happens, your neighbors are going to be the enemy. So, you don't want them to know you got food. They're going to come and take everything from you. And, they're stockpiling, they got 30, 40 guns. They only have one person that knows how to shoot, but they have 30 guns. And you're never going to be able to. It's stupidity. It's stupidity. It's a foolish mindset, the secret squirrel mindset of not building community, not having a group of people around you working with you. It's not smart. You're gonna, if you don't have community, I'll put it this way: if you don't have community post collapse, you're going to die. Period. You're going to die. You need to have a group of people around you. You need to have as large a community of people you feel are trustworthy as possible. And you have to start that now. It can't be post-collapse when everyone's in a panic. You need to start building that now. You need to start vetting people now, figure out who's on board, who's reliable, who's a flake. You want to vet those people and keep the people who are solid. You want to keep them around you. There's 1,000 different scenarios that I could think of off the top of my head where if you're by yourself, you're done for. You're doomed. So just really, people, think about it. Think about community. If you don't have people you can rely on, if you don't have skilled people with skills, production skills, food producing, animal heraldry, if you don't have people who know self-defense, you got to have a large, bubble or barrier of people around you in order to survive a situation where rule of law disappears. If things get that bad, you have to have community.